Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Noelle St. Germain-Sehr, and I'm the co-chair of the SACES Women's Interest Network. And I'm joined here today with Dr. Natoya Haskins. And I'm really grateful to Dr. Haskins for being with us today for this interview. So Dr. Haskins, I'm going to read just a little bit of her, a few of her accomplishments. She serves as the Associate Professor and Director of Diversity and Inclusion for the College of William and Mary. And she currently also serves as the Treasurer for the Association for Multicultural Counseling and Development. And she served prior to that as the President of SACES. And in the last 2 years in those roles, she's helped to usher over 30 women of color, graduate students and new professionals into leadership positions. And in addition to all of that, she has been elected as the president-elect of ACES. So I am so pleased and really honored to have the opportunity to work with Dr. Haskins, but to interview her and talk a little bit today about her experience with mentorship and leadership, and really get some words of wisdom for female counselor educators and graduate students going into the profession. So thank you so much for joining me today, Dr. Haskins. I'm happy to be with you.
Thank you for asking me. I'm so glad to be able to share and looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you. So I've got a few questions. I'll just go ahead and start with those, and we can just see where things lead. Can you describe some of the ways you were mentored toward your path of being a leader in the profession? And if you lacked mentorship, how did you pursue leadership opportunities? So kind of a two-parter, because I don't know your background.
Right. So for me, leadership started probably early in my life, leadership opportunities. And probably one of the first major opportunities I had as a leader was in my time in the military. I was elected as kind of the, during our training process, as like the leader of our, wasn't really a platoon, but it was our group, for lack of a better term right now. And that really allowed me to lean into my leadership skills. And I learned a lot from our instructors and just how to navigate challenging situations, how to bring people together, because in the military, one of the things you learn really quickly, whether you're a leader or not, is that this is a team. We are here together. We have a common goal. We have a mission. The weakest of you is actually still a part of the team. And that is a part of, you have to consider everyone, so that became really kind of a pivotal part of how I lead, so I consider everyone, in my leadership process and in the strategies that I implement. And so that was probably, I was 20, right after undergrad. And so 21, 22. And then I had kind of a second, I would say, major leadership role during my PhD program, where I served as vice president for graduate students on the Virginia School Counseling Board. And that opportunity, it just kind of, I'm going to say, fell in my lap to some extent, but I'd been a member of VSCA pretty much my entire time as a school counselor. And that started when I was a master's student. So I started as a member of that organization and, started attending meetings. And I really I can't quite remember like how I ended up running for the position. I think somebody mentioned, to me that there would be an opportunity, available on the board if I was interested. And it may have been one of my fellow counselors or, someone that was in the field of school counseling that I knew. And I threw my name in the hat and I ended up winning that election. And that really started my entry into the counseling leadership kind of, role. And there was a Black woman who was the president of VSCA at the time. And, I would consider her someone that I kind of got mentoring from afar. So it wasn't a formal mentoring role. She probably didn't even know how much impact she had on my life, but just seeing her. And there were several other Black women that were also a part of the organization and leadership positions. And, so I looked at them and I, got a lot of motivation for continuing and realizing the importance of having voices from diverse perspectives at the table, like how necessary they were. And during that time, I actually was instrumental in starting a mentorship program for new professionals, so and that program went on for a number of years. I'm not actually sure if it's still going on now. I think they probably morphed it into something, slightly different. But I do think there's some element of a mentorship program that is still a part of the organization. But that really kind of started my service to the field in a leadership role. And so went on to, my PhD program, or finished my PhD program because I was doing this during my PhD program, and went on to join the faculty at the University of Georgia. And it just so happened that Noelle St was on faculty there as well as Daryl Bailey. And he, at the time, I think was the past president of SACES when I got there on faculty. And then Noelle St was moving into the role as SACES president. And so both of them played really a central role in me kind of feeling like counselor ed leadership was something that was available to me as a woman of color and as a Black woman in particular. And I remember having a conversation with Dr. Singh early, probably my first year, just saying, if there's anything I can do, please let me know. And of course, she was like, absolutely. And, there were opportunities given to serve as, committee chair and working on different committees. And then when Dr. Heather Trey Paul moved into, the role as SACES president, I did the same thing. I was like, if there's anything you need, please let me know. I want to be of service. And, and she reached out, and, there were a number of opportunities that I had that allowed me to really kind of grow in my understanding of the organization. And so those, in particular, those relationships that I had and opportunities that I had really kind of opened the door for me to move more fully into leadership. So I served initially as SACES secretary. So I was elected secretary probably my third year in the academy. And that really allowed me to just gain a deeper understanding of the organization, really be a part of some of the decision-making processes, and, have a voice around, some of our the direction around diversity and equity and inclusion and advocacy. And then the opportunity came around where, we were talking about, maybe I was talking with a couple of people about the possibility of running. Somebody said, you should run and for president. And I was like, yeah, maybe. And then I was like, okay, I could do this. And I did. And I, this is the other thing I told myself. I said, well, if you don't put your name in the hat, you'll never know if this was an opportunity, that you could have had. And if you don't run, there's a possibility that nobody that looks like you is going to be a part of the conversation. And so I did. And, you know, that. So, and so that is kind of how I've navigated through various leadership opportunities. You know, I've tried to really have the training, you know, developing an understanding of the organization, you know, really jumping in different ways, volunteering, you know, to serve as on committees, to chair committees or task forces, you know, and really just garner a wealth of knowledge about different aspects of the organizations. And so that has been probably the most helpful. I mean, that's connected in some way to my mentorship because those opportunities were given, connected to the relationships that I had with these particular individuals. And sometimes I feel like I may have really kind of, I'm gonna say forced, but, you know, like I asked and I was, you know, pretty persistent, you know, so if I didn't hear back from you, I might send another email in a very gentle nudge, like I'm open if there's anything, you know, I really want to be involved, and, you know, made it clear that I was willing. And when opportunities were presented, you know, I typically said yes, you know, and that to me is an important piece too when it comes to the mentoring relationship, that when opportunities are presented, you know, sometimes people are like, oh, well, I really don't want to do that. I would rather do this. And I was kind of like, well, yes, I'll do that. And knowing that a lot of times when it comes to opportunities, when people offer and you say no, they may not offer again, you know. And so I've always also taken on this notion of, you know, be a team player. I can do the grunt work, you know, I can also sit in a leadership team meeting and strategize, you know, for the vision of the organization, but I really should be able to do it all, you know, and that I learned that probably came from very early age. I could even talk about like my mother being a mentor to me around leadership. And she was a pastor for a number of years. And so I saw how she led in really a servant leader type capacity. And that has played a significant role in how I lead, how I look at, you know, members of organizations. And so I'll stop there because I feel like I've talked quite a bit, but yes, that leadership mentorship for me has been probably a part of my life for most of it, in some capacity, and it has just kind of morphed over time. And I also think, and we're going to talk more about this, but this notion of sometimes being a bit like I will jump in and say, you know, like I try not to let the anxiety of an opportunity take over and prevent me from taking advantage of something, because, you know, there are times where I'm nervous. There's some anxiety there about, you know, you're stepping into a place where nobody that looks like you is there. And I have to admit, you know, that's still there sometimes. And I really have worked, you know, over the years alongside, you know, some really great leaders and see how they navigate that and manage that. But sometimes I also know that it can prevent you, you know, I think we have to be more honest too about and transparent about leadership, that, you know, there are some challenges that come along with it. And sometimes it can be difficult to step into those roles, especially if you think that you're not going to get the support. And there are also times where I know I've had to reach out and say, hey, can you help me with this? And that's okay too, you know, because you don't have to know everything, you know, and I've learned that through my mentors as well, that it's important to be able to reach out and connect with people that can kind of fill the gaps in areas that you might not feel like you have a strong skill set in. So.
Well, you said so many things that, and I figured that I would go off script with the questions because I knew naturally this would evolve into more of a conversation. But you've said so many things that really strike me as valuable for people to hear that might be watching this. One of them being that mentorship isn't always a formalized relationship. A lot of times, as you said, sometimes mentors don't even know that they're mentoring. They're leading by example. We're feeling that from them. I've had that experience myself with several mentors, and then gone to them and said, just so you know, you've really affected me, and this is how. And you're mentoring by who you are, by the way that you are in the world, how you carry yourself professionally, the way in which you lead, the way in which you lead by example is mentoring. It's not the formalized definition that we think of as mentorship. So I was kind of noticing how some of that came in, and even the opportunities that you talked about being built out of connection. And I think that's another piece of this when we are networking, when we're in situations and we see opportunities, opening ourselves up to that and taking advantage of those opportunities and offering ourselves is such a huge part of this. But you also brought up the courage that it takes, especially when you're talking about being, the only woman of color stepping forward into this position, or, not seeing yourself represented, and then saying, I might be the only voice on this committee, for my, for people who look like me. And representation is so very important. Being able to see yourself and see others like you in positions of leadership is important, so important. I don't know if you've seen the documentary Misrepresentation. Have you by any chance seen it?
I've heard of it.
Yeah, the statistics in that are just staggering in terms of women's like positions of power, and the differences when there are in terms of women's perception of their ability to lead based on what they see in terms of representation in positions of power in different countries and things like that.
Absolutely.
It's really,
it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense because, I mean, for so long, who I saw around me were white men leading, and on occasion, white women. And it was really hard to envision yourself in those spaces. It wasn't until I, was in my PhD program, like I said, and, there was, I saw some Black women in particular, not just even women of color, but Black women leading, at the state level, that I thought, okay, there might be a place here for me. This is possible. That's the thing, this is possible.
Right. Yeah. And that's exactly, kind of what I was getting at, is sometimes if we can't see the representation, we don't even believe it's possible. Yep. So important. So kind of a follow-up to that, how do you navigate developing your leadership skills in the context of kind of higher education processes and dynamics? We all deal with a lot of issues in the context of higher ed. How do you develop your leadership skills? I mean, you have really, moved into a position of leadership within the university, very, in a very pronounced way, and done an amazing job in the short time that this position's been around. And I'm wondering how you're navigating all of that in the context of all the dynamics that exist in higher ed.
Yeah, this is one of those questions where I wish I had like a perfect answer right now, and I could say, you know what, I have done this very, very well. I am learning, so much of this for me is observing, I'm trying to read and also reaching out to people that I consider mentors and getting their kind of thoughts on like best practices, and, trying to attend, trainings and leadership summits and sessions and workshops to try to learn what I don't know. And so I was talking to some doc students the other day about the fact that we don't do a really good job around teaching leadership skills. But yet many of us counselor educators will move into some capacity of leadership, whether it be coordinating a program or doing, service leadership. We all end up doing it to some extent. And, so this is not necessarily answering the question, but I think it speaks to the fact that I think we have to do a more focused, intentional job in doc programs of preparing our students to become leaders, because we will. We all end up becoming leaders. And so for me, it's, I have had some really good mentors. I've had some really good opportunities. I do believe my military experience has played a significant role in my ability to really kind of work under pressure and deal with, just really tough situations and difficult situations. And I mean, as a leader, one of the things that I've learned, that I'm still working on, but is getting buy-in, from majority. And it doesn't always mean everybody's going to come along, but the movement still has to go, like even when, 20% of people might not necessarily agree with what you're doing, you still have to do the work, but also learning then how to work around and support that 20%. Like you still have to find a way to connect with everybody. And those are some of the challenges for me, especially in my role as the director of diversity and inclusion, where you have people that are coming to the table with different perspectives on what diversity and inclusion needs to look like. Some people feel like it's not even something we need to focus on, or maybe we're focusing too much on it. And having to figure out how do you balance all of those perspectives and validate perspectives without minimizing or marginalizing certain people. And that's been a challenge. We're not teaching that. I didn't learn that, and so much of that is, on the job training. I try to really, like when our provost speaks and when our, dean talks and the president, I really listen, and not just content, but like delivery. I'm listening for like, what are they not saying as well as what they're saying? Like, how are they saying it? And though that's how I'm, like learning. That's the only way to really kind of describe it. Like, I'm watching other people, I'm observing other people, often you hear leaders talk about a listening tour or observation, like year. And I really kind of am looking at that. That's kind of how I haven't necessarily said it or articulated it to everyone, but that's really what I find myself doing. It's like, I'm trying to see, what is it can I glean from this person that connects with me and how I see leadership and change? And then how can I kind of integrate it into my personal leadership strategies and style? So, and there is so much is so political as well, I feel like, in higher ed. So there's this, and I think that's one of the reasons too why I'm trying to be very observant about how people that are above me, in more pronounced leadership roles are handling the politics, the bureaucracy. Because, and while I'm sure they don't necessarily have all the answers either, but it gives me an idea of how moving forward I can address, similar issues or what have you. So that's been how I have, developed my skills, and I'm continuing to develop them. But, watching, using people as mentors from afar, and having some mentors that are, closer, people that are formal, that I would consider formal mentors, and I could reach out and say, hey, what do you think about this? And, all of that is important. Having people that are at your same level as well, like having a group of people that are in a similar place where you can have like that peer mentorship and support, I think is really helpful as well. And that's something that I've been, developing, over the last year or two, that really camaraderie where you can come together and you're able to talk about similar things because you're in a similar place. And kind of, we call it kind of processing through. We have our days where we'll just process, through like, how are we going to address these, particular issues? We'll spend 30 minutes on one person's issue and then 30 minutes on another person, and just kind of process ideas for helping them navigate, the challenges of, higher ed or education, or counseling. So that's a little bit about that piece.
Yeah, and the things that strike me as so important in what you're saying are, your openness to listening, to observing, to taking the time to do that, and really integrate what you're noticing as, lessons around leadership and effective leadership, but also the support, being able to process, being able to work with other peers, to kind of talk through how to navigate some of these challenging situations. That, in essence, one of the things I think is a misconception of leadership is that you get into a position of leadership and you're doing it all kind of as a leader. And that's not what leadership is really about. You're doing it with people.
Absolutely.
You're getting support throughout the entire process. And I think sometimes people shy away from leadership because of the fear of having to make all these decisions and be in this position in isolation. And that's not at all what I've experienced and what you're describing.
Absolutely. I think that's been one of the most helpful pieces of being a leader, is realizing that this is not a solo experience. Now, I guess it can be, and for some people, maybe that is how they lead. But for me, it absolutely is a we. I feel like in order for me to lead, I have to go. I need people alongside me, and it's as much for me as it is for them, and helping them to also develop their skills, because at some point, other people are going to need to step up and move into some of these positions. And I would love to see more diversity and more women in positions of leadership, and so there's so many hurdles too, like, that we don't talk about. And a lot of times when it comes to leadership, like to run for ACES president, like you have to have some experience in leadership. So, if you haven't had that experience, it makes it really difficult to leap into a role of a president. And if you're not given opportunities for that to happen, it's going to be more and more difficult, to kind of find the opportunities, and then be able to successfully move into that office. And so having people that work alongside you, you really are helping them develop their skill set as well. So.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's really, the link between leadership and mentorship is so close. And I think that's exactly what you're describing, is that in the way you lead, you're mentoring others into leadership. And it's an integrated, it seems like it's a real integrated fit for you.
Yes, absolutely.
So I'm curious about your scholarship, like how that ties into your unique intersectionality of identities, how you have, how you manage. I mean, you're leading and you're a mentor, but you're also a scholar and a researcher and a teacher and advocacy. I mean, you're an advocate. How does all of this kind of reflect your unique intersecting identities?
Right. Yeah. So when I started doing my research, I was a top student, and most of my research has been about the Black woman's experience in counselor ed in some capacity, um, starting from master's students all the way up through counselor educators. And that really mirrors who I am and the identities that I bring. Recently I started doing some research around mothering, as well as looking more closely at the role of affinity groups and mentoring for Black women in counselor ed. And so those pieces tie really tightly to how I lead and how I mentor. So I have this past year started a national affinity group for Black women in doctoral and master's programs, and we currently have about 30 women that participate, and it'll be open up again in the fall for more women to join. But that is a way for me to tie kind of my service, my research, and my leadership together. And so it kind of just comes out. I don't often think a lot about my like the connections, because it comes out of the passion that I have for supporting Black women, because there's so many times in my own career where I didn't necessarily get the support or mentoring, and where people kind of as a first generation college student, I didn't always have access and opportunities. I'm grateful for the ones that I did have, and I tried to capitalize on them as much as I possibly could, because I didn't know when the next one might come along. And so I was always mindful as a doc student, and then as a new faculty member, of just the lack of support that many African American women have, during their doc programs and on into the professorate. And of course, that's not the case all the time. I know that there are a number of Black women that have had support, but when you look at the numbers, when you start looking statistically at the number of Black women that move into tenure line faculty positions in comparison to the number that graduate, and then if you look even more closely at the number that go to research one or research two institutions, and then looking at who gets promoted to full professor, those numbers continue to dwindle for Black women. In particular, I think women in general, we know women in general, but in particular, it's such a stark difference for Black women. It's scary when you look at those numbers. And so that's why my passion around mentoring Black women and doing research specifically around how to support Black women, and individuals of color, so I do have, more expansive kind of research too around supporting students and faculty of color more broadly, and individuals of color more broadly. But primarily, that's kind of my passion point, is really around supporting, ensuring that Black women, or the research that I'm doing, has an impact on the experiences of Black women in counselor ed.
Yeah. So it kind of dovetails really nicely with that, the next couple of questions, because it's really wondering, what advice would you give to female counselor educators in terms of seeking mentorship, and how to find a mentor, and then what advice would you give regarding leadership?
Yeah, I mean, I think for female counselor educators, in terms of seeking mentorship, one of the things I realized early is that, while it's wonderful if mentors can look like you, um, and if you can find people that look like you, that's beautiful. And I think there's something there that you don't always get, when you don't have that. And you can get mentoring from people that don't have shared identities. And I know people have said this over and over. I mean, I've heard it, in so many different capacities. But what I also think we don't talk as much about, and I mentioned it earlier, is that mentoring doesn't have to look the way I think we have talked about it looking in the past, that, you have to have these one or two people, that are your mentors and that have kind of ushered you through the academy. What I found is, I have people that are kind of my, from afar mentors, people that I look to. I look at what they're doing. I look at like how they've done it, and I try to model some of my work and efforts around kind of what they're doing and how they've navigated. Um, and that has helped me significantly. In addition to having some of those more formal relationships, I also think asking, if you happen to be in a doc program or in a faculty position where you have not been assigned a mentor, talk to your dean, talk to your department chair, and ask, for a mentor, and you want to have someone that can support you, as you go through, your process as a counselor educator. And I think regardless if you're tenure line or clinical or or what your role might be, you should have a mentor. And I think sometimes we focus on only tenure line faculty. I mean, but just because you're not a tenure line faculty member doesn't mean that you don't need mentorship. And so I think we have to kind of change that narrative as well, and also help people to understand, counselor educator women, that you can request a mentor regardless of what your role is. And look for opportunities within professional organizations as well to connect. And a lot of times we might not have like a formal mentoring program for new professionals, but you have opportunities to serve on committees and interest networks. And a lot of times through those, you can connect and develop either peer mentoring relationships or more formal type of mentoring. So that's pretty much what I would say there. The thing about mentoring, I think sometimes we hang our hats so much on the fact that we had a mentor or we didn't have a mentor. And what I found in my experience was, I didn't have great mentors in my doc program. But I learned a lot because I didn't have them. I had to do so much more work on my own. And in some ways, it made me into the person that I am today and how I see the world in terms of counselor ed and the work that I do. So I also feel like there are times where you have to make the best out of a situation. And you can't let the fact that you don't have a mentor define you. Seek out opportunities like I talked about the affinity group that I started. If there are groups like that, that you can kind of connect with, that are more informal in nature. I know a lot of people now have these different networks on like Facebook and things like that are smaller groups, where you share resources. And I feel like those are informal mentoring type experiences. So if you don't have someone that's a formal mentor, there are other ways to get that support.
Yeah. And any final words of advice on leadership in particular?
Don't be afraid to step out. And, because all of us have some level of fear when it comes to doing something new. And so when you look at people that maybe are in leadership roles, realize they are just like you. They were just like you at some point. And you have the ability to do exactly what they're doing if that's something you want to do. So be courageous, step out. We need you. We need you to step out and to take part in this leadership, especially as a woman in this field. We need your voice at the table.
Well, I think, I can speak for myself in saying that I am so happy that you have had the courage to step out and to take on leadership roles. You are an incredible, incredible inspiration to me, and I know to many other people. And I am just so grateful for everything that you bring to the profession every day. And so grateful to have you here and taking the time to record this interview. So thank you so much. And I really just want to tell you how much I appreciate you.
Thank you for the opportunity. This has been great. So I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks so much.